And this is the reality of it. I mean, people can add up, and the cost of this, the cost to the Prime Minister's character, to Labor's word, I think is huge. I mean, we saw that push on in the papers yesterday from unnamed Labor backbenchers saying that they want to rip apart negative gearing. Well, of course, you wheel out the Treasurer who says, look, we're not going to touch it. He doesn't rule it out forever, but he says we have no plans. Well, after what happened last week, who the hell's going to believe them?
Oh, absolutely. And this is a real problem when you break a promise this big. It's very hard to accept his word on that stuff. One would hope if they were contemplating anything like that, like John Howard did with the GST, you take it to an election. That's the real issue here with this. But yeah, I mean, they've done it once. Unless there's enough of an outcry against it, they'll do it again. Look, Dunkley's really shaping is so fascinating, and it just shows you how Australian politics can turn so quickly. We're going to be there in the studio in Melbourne, Peter, 11 months after a result where Albanese was on top of the world doing what he shouldn't have done, and that's winning Aston. And the opposite result looks, at least 50% likely. That's just an 11-month period. And that shows why there's no room for complacency in federal politics.
If you live in the seat, get used to seeing me. I've been popping down there quite a bit. I'll keep going all the way through. I like to get, we call it field research, right? I don't like to just read the polls. I like to get on the ground. I like to talk to people. I like to see how many houses are for rent, how many shops are for lease, all that sort of stuff to make my assessment on the seat. Talk to me about the game being played here by Labor. They're trying to make these tax changes, which were their problem last week, broken promises and all that, into a problem for the Libs. They're trying to seed some idea that there's division. Now, I sent a few messages today to the Liberals and said, do not get spooked by this. Do not fall into Labor's trap. It doesn't matter what you guys think about this until you see the legislation. And in any event, what you might do at the next election, should you win, or that's a good year off, you're going to make this about Labor. This still is Labor's problem.
Yeah, I mean, Peter Dutton's indicated he's not announcing anything this week. He wants to make it about the government. That seems fair. He probably wants to get some research done on it in Dunkley as well, quite frankly and cynically, might I say. But what I think would make sense is if they seek to amend it in the Senate to reinstate it for the higher income earners. They keep the tax cut for the lower income earners. They listen to Jim Chalmers whack the table and say you're fiscally irresponsible. You just say, well, what choice did I have when you guys reneged on your promise? And then you just pass the government's package and say, we'll do better for higher income earners at the next election, and Jim Chalmers won't. I mean, that's, you got to have a whole shadow cabinet discussion. They might get spooked by the fiscally irresponsible argument the government will mount, but that's what I'd do, I'll tell you right now.
Just quickly, how do the Teals play this? Because, I mean, they're in the most affluent seats. Their people lose the most out of these stage 3 tax cut changes. They all said they wanted tax reform, yeah, sure, and they also wanted integrity in government. Well, they've got neither out of last week. How do they sell this to their electorates? Presumably they're going to pass it.
Well, I don't think Allegra and Zali are, and I think they're smart not to do so because they've got the electorates with the most people over 180, as if you could afford to live in Manly or Bondi if you weren't on 180. But, I mean, in terms of, at least as a homeowner, they have renters as well, right? But the rest of them, it's going to cause real issues. They're the ones who've copped the wedge the most. I mean, the government hopes to wedge, the opposition, even the Greens, is wedge this Teal wall which stands between Peter Dutton and Labor. And it's going to be quite difficult for them. The ones I don't understand the most, and we pulled together this graphic today, are Kate Chaney and Curtin. And, I grew up in Perth. I know how wealthy Curtin is. Cottesloe and Nedlands and all these areas, and Monique Ryan in Kooyong. And I think that's opened the door for the Liberals. I think Anthony Albanese and Jim Chalmers have allowed the Liberals a chance in some of these seats they wouldn't have otherwise had a chance in, Peter.
We will watch this closely. Andrew Clennell, thank you as always.